My name is Serena Okafor Walsh. I am 34 years old. I am a litigation attorney at one of the most respected law firms in Washington, D.C. I have argued before federal judges. I have cross-examined corporate executives on the stand and watched them unravel under the precision of questions I had spent weeks constructing. I have won cases that senior partners told me were unwinnable. None of that prepared me for the moment I was pushed down a flight of stairs inside my own home. I want to tell you this story in the order it actually happened, because the order matters. The order is the evidence, and I have spent my entire professional life understanding that evidence properly assembled is the only thing that stands between truth and the version of truth that powerful people prefer. So let me start at the beginning. The beginning is a Sunday evening in late September, 11 days before my husband's 42nd birthday. I was 6 months pregnant. The baby, our daughter, the one we had been trying to have for 3 years, was healthy, active, and had spent most of that afternoon pressing her heel against my lowest rib with the focused determination of someone testing structural integrity. I was standing at the top of the staircase in our Georgetown townhouse, holding a glass of water and a prenatal vitamin about to go downstairs to the kitchen to start dinner. My mother-in-law, Margaret Walsh, was in the house. She had been in the house for 4 days, having arrived as she always arrived without a confirmed departure date, and with the specific quality of presence that fills every room she occupies, regardless of whether she is physically in it. Margaret Walsh is 63 years old. She is the widow of Senator Richard Walsh, who died 4 years ago and left behind a trust fund worth approximately $18 million, a real estate portfolio spanning 3 states, and a will that contained a provision his wife had apparently not expected and had not accepted. The provision was this: upon the birth of a biological grandchild born to Richard and Margaret's son, Connor Walsh, 51% of the trust's principal would transfer directly to that grandchild's custodial account, bypassing Margaret's control entirely. The remaining 49% would stay under Margaret's management until her death, at which point it would flow to Connor and his heirs. I knew about this provision. Connor had told me about it before we were engaged in the context of a longer conversation about his father's estate and the complicated relationship between his parents' money and his own professional life. He had told me as information, not as incentive. I had married Connor Walsh because he was a good man, genuinely good in the specific way of people who have grown up in the shadow of a powerful parent and have quietly, deliberately chosen to become something different. Margaret had never believed this. Margaret believed everyone married her son for the money. She had believed this about the 2 women he dated seriously before me, and she believed it about me with the particular intensity of someone who had decided the conclusion before examining the evidence. She believed it more, not less, when she discovered I was a litigation attorney, because in Margaret's understanding of the world, lawyers are people who know how to construct narratives, and a lawyer who married her wealthy son was constructing a narrative. She was not entirely wrong about lawyers constructing narratives. She was wrong about which of us was doing it. On that Sunday evening in late September, Margaret and I had an argument. This was not unusual. We had been having arguments since the first month of my marriage to Connor 3 years ago. The arguments had a consistent structure. Margaret would say something that was either directly insulting or designed to be plausibly deniable. As an insult, I would respond with the measured precision I use in depositions, and Margaret would escalate to the point where Connor, if present, would intervene with the specific exhausted diplomacy of someone who has been managing the same conflict since childhood. Connor was not present that evening. He was in Boston for a client meeting that had extended into a dinner. He had called at 7 to say he would be back by 10. The argument that evening was about the nursery. Margaret had, while I was at work on Friday, rearranged the furniture in the nursery without asking me. She had also replaced the crib I had chosen, a specific model I had researched for 2 months based on safety ratings and pediatric guidelines, with a different crib she had purchased and had delivered while I was in court. When I came home Friday evening and found this, I had said calmly that I appreciated her help, but that I needed the original crib back and the furniture returned to its arrangement. Margaret had not returned the original crib. She had not returned the furniture to its arrangement. When I raised this again on Sunday evening, she told me I was being controlling and ungrateful, and that I should be grateful she was investing in her grandchild's comfort. I told her the crib she had purchased did not meet current safety standards. I told her this as a fact, not a criticism, because it was a fact I had verified from the American Academy of Pediatrics website. Margaret told me I thought I knew everything because I was a lawyer, and that being a lawyer did not make me a good mother, and that she had raised Connor without the benefit of a law degree, and he had turned out fine. I told her this conversation was not productive, and that I was going downstairs to make dinner. I turned toward the staircase. What happened next took approximately 2 seconds. I felt both of her hands flat against my upper back, and then I felt the absence of the floor beneath my feet. I am a litigation attorney. I have a specific trained relationship with the concept of reconstruction, the process of assembling fragmentary evidence into a coherent account of what happened. I have done this with car accidents, with financial transactions, with corporate decisions made in conference rooms where no recording was permitted. I know how to read a set of facts and determine what they mean. What the facts mean in this case, I fell forward, which is consistent with a push from behind rather than a loss of balance. A loss of balance at the top of a staircase typically produces a sideways fall. I fell forward down the length of the staircase and I fell fast, which is consistent with applied force rather than a stumble. I grabbed the railing on the left side at the third step down. This slowed my descent, but did not stop it. I hit the landing at the bottom with my right side, my right arm absorbing the initial impact. My right shoulders took the worst of it. I did not hit my head. I did not hit my stomach directly. I landed on my side, curling instinctively the way the body does when it understands that the most important thing it contains needs to be protected. I lay on the landing for what I later estimated was approximately 30 seconds. During those 30 seconds, I conducted the fastest triage assessment of my professional career. I was conscious. I could move my fingers and toes. The pain in my right shoulder was severe and would later be confirmed as a fracture of the greater tuberosity. My ribs on the right side were bruised, 2 of them cracked. My right knee was badly contused. The baby was moving. She was moving in the specific urgent way of a person responding to sudden shock, rapid, disorganized movement that slowly over the next 2 minutes settled back into her normal pattern. She was alive. She was unhurt. I did not cry. I assessed the situation, confirmed the survivable facts, and began to think. Margaret appeared at the top of the staircase approximately 45 seconds after I hit the landing. She looked down at me. Her face was not the face of a woman who has just watched her pregnant daughter-in-law fall down a flight of stairs in horror. It was the face of a woman calculating something. Then she composed her face into something that looked like concern. And she came down the stairs and she knelt beside me and she said, "Oh my God, Serena, you slipped." I looked at her. "You slipped," she said again. Her voice was steady and deliberate. "On the stairs. You were carrying that glass of water and you slipped." I understood what was happening. I am a lawyer. I understood lying on the landing of my own staircase with a fractured shoulder and 2 cracked ribs, exactly what the statement "you slipped" was designed to accomplish. It was the first line of a narrative. It was being established before I could establish a competing one. I said nothing. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, which I was still wearing, and I called 911. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, Margaret sat beside me on the landing and maintained the performance of concerned mother-in-law with the consistency of someone who has rehearsed it. She told me I needed to stay still. She asked if I wanted her to call Connor. I said I had already texted him. I had texted him 3 words: "Come home now." I had also, in those 11 minutes, done one other thing. I had reached up to the decorative mirror mounted on the wall at the base of the staircase, a mirror I had chosen specifically for that location because the angle gave me a partial view of the upper landing when I was in the kitchen, and I had looked at its reflection. In the reflection, I could see the top of the staircase, and mounted on the underside of the upper landing's overhang, where I had installed it 3 weeks earlier after the first time Margaret had cornered me in a room and said something that I had no way to prove was a small, wide-angle security camera. The red light was on. It had been recording. The emergency room at Georgetown University Hospital was bright and loud and smelled of antiseptic and the specific human exhaustion of people managing crises at scale. I was triaged quickly. A pregnant woman with a fall injury goes to the front of most queues, and within 20 minutes of arriving, I was in an examination bay with fetal monitors attached and an orthopedic resident doing preliminary imaging on my shoulder. The baby's heartbeat was strong and regular on the monitor. I held on to that sound the way you hold on to a fixed point when everything else is moving. Connor arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after I texted him. He came through the curtain, looking like someone had physically struck him, his face pale. His jacket still on from the Boston dinner, his eyes doing the rapid inventory of a person trying to assess damage before he allowed himself to feel it. He came to my side immediately, took my uninjured hand, and did not say anything for a moment. He just held my hand and looked at the fetal monitor and let out a breath that sounded like it had been held since the moment his phone buzzed in a Boston restaurant. "She's okay," I said. "The baby is okay. I'm okay." "What happened?" he said. Margaret was in the waiting area. She had ridden in the ambulance with me sitting across from the paramedic and maintaining her performance of shaken concern, and she was now presumably waiting to deliver her version of events to her son before I could deliver mine. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." Connor sat down in the chair beside my bed. He was still holding my hand. He looked at me with the expression of someone who is bracing but willing. I told him everything. The argument about the nursery, the moment at the top of the staircase, the 2 seconds, the fall, the 30 seconds on the landing while I assessed the damage, the 11 minutes while Margaret sat beside me and said you slipped and I said nothing and called 911. I told him about the camera. Connor was very still when I told him about the camera. Not the stillness of someone shutting down, the stillness of someone absorbing information that is reorganizing the structure of their understanding. I had seen this stillness in him before, in moments when something he had believed turned out to be different from what it was. It was the stillness of a fundamentally honest person confronting a reality he had not wanted to acknowledge. "She pushed you," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. "She pushed you down a flight of stairs while you were 6 months pregnant." "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Does the camera have audio?" "Yes," I said. "The model I chose has directional audio capture. It should have recorded the argument at the top of the stairs." Connor closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his face had settled into something I had not seen from him before. Not anger, not grief, but a specific cold clarity. The clarity of someone who has made a decision and is now on the other side of it. "What do you need?" he said. "I need you to go back to the waiting area," I said, "and tell your mother that you spoke with me briefly and that I am resting and that the doctors have asked for family to wait outside. I need you to be completely neutral with her. Don't comfort her, don't confront her. Just be neutral. And then I need you to call Marcus." Marcus Chen was my law partner. He was 38 years old, a former federal prosecutor with a specific talent for cases that required the kind of documentation assembly that other attorneys found tedious. He was also, for the past 4 years, the person I trusted more than anyone outside my marriage with the specifics of my professional and personal legal situation. I had called Marcus 3 weeks ago when I installed the camera and told him what I was doing and why. He had not been surprised. He had asked me 2 questions. what model of camera, and what was the storage configuration, and then he had said, "Send me the access credentials so I can download the footage remotely the moment anything happens." He was already awake when I called him from the hospital at 10:47 that Sunday evening. He answered on the first ring. "I'm downloading the footage now," he said before I could say anything. "Both cameras," I said. A pause. "Both, the one at the top of the staircase," I said, "and the one in the kitchen that I installed last Tuesday. I should tell you about the kitchen camera. 3 weeks before the fall, I had found something in my own kitchen that I should not have found. I had been making tea at 6 in the morning. Connor was still asleep. Margaret had been staying with us for 2 days and was ostensibly asleep as well when I noticed that the container of herbal tea that Margaret had brought me as a gift the previous week was positioned differently on the counter than I had left it. I am a litigation attorney. I notice when things are positioned differently. It is an occupational habit that crosses over into personal life in ways that are sometimes inconvenient and occasionally, as on this Tuesday morning, essential. I picked up the tea container and looked at it carefully. It was a loose-leaf herbal blend that Margaret had told me was a specific preparation she had used during her own pregnancy chamomile ginger lemon balm. She had presented it with the warmth she occasionally produced in the first days of a visit, before the warmth curdled into something else. I had been drinking it every evening for a week. It tasted slightly different from the last cup I had made, more bitter in a way I had attributed to variability in loose-leaf preparations. I set the container down. I opened my laptop and spent 45 minutes researching herbal preparations that could be added to loose-leaf tea blends and that could have diverse effects on pregnancy. I found 3. 2 of them were bitter. One of them, blue cohosh, a plant-derived compound historically used in folk medicine to induce uterine contractions, was described in multiple medical literature sources as dangerous in pregnancy and capable of causing preterm labor or miscarriage in sufficient concentrations. I did not drink the tea again. I put the container in a sealed plastic bag and placed it in the back of the cabinet under the sink where it would remain untouched until I decided what to do with it. I installed the kitchen camera the following Tuesday. I called my OB that morning and described my symptoms over the previous week. The increased cramping I had attributed to the baby's growing size. The nausea I had attributed to the second trimester not resolving as quickly as expected, the headaches. My doctor ordered a blood panel. The results came back 4 days later. The results were not definitive. The concentrations were not high enough to constitute a clinical finding of poisoning, but they were anomalous enough that my doctor noted them in my chart and asked me to come in for a follow-up in 2 weeks and to contact her immediately if my symptoms worsened. I had documented all of this. I had photographed the tea container. I had kept the sealed bag. I had printed the blood panel results. I had written a detailed contemporaneous memo, the kind lawyers write to preserve their own account of events, while the memory is fresh, describing everything from the moment I noticed the repositioned container to the moment I received the blood panel results. The memo was dated 3 weeks before the fall. The memo was in the secure client file I had created for myself at the firm under a case number that Marcus was the only other person who knew existed. I had been building the case for 3 weeks before Margaret pushed me down the stairs. Marcus arrived at the hospital at 12:30 a.m. He came through the curtain carrying a laptop bag and 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafeteria, and he set 1 cup on the tray beside my bed without asking because he knew I would need it. "Footage is downloaded and backed up to 3 separate secure servers," he said, sitting in the chair Connor had vacated. "The primary server is off-site. The secondary is at the firm. The third is encrypted cloud storage under your personal account." "Have you watched it?" I said. "Yes," he said. His voice was careful. "Tell me what it shows." Marcus opened his laptop. He turned it toward me. The footage from the staircase camera was clear. The wide-angle lens had captured the top of the landing and the upper portion of the staircase. The audio was as I had expected from the model's specifications, precise directional capture, had focused on the space near the top of the stairs. You could hear the argument. You could hear Margaret's voice sharp and escalating, and you could hear mine measured and then final. This conversation is not productive, and I'm going downstairs to make dinner. You could hear the sound of my footsteps turning toward the staircase, and then you could see Margaret's hands. The camera angle caught them from the side, not a straight-on view, but sufficient. Both hands flat against my upper back at the moment I was at the top of the stairs. And then the rapid forward movement, and then I was gone from the frame. What the camera captured after I fell was in some ways more significant than the push itself, because it captured what Margaret did in the 45 seconds before she came down the stairs to where I was lying. She did not go to the top of the stairs and look down immediately. She stood in the hallway for approximately 10 seconds, and then she ran to the small table near the bedroom door where her phone was charging. She picked up her phone. She looked at the screen. She put the phone back down. Then she went to the top of the stairs and looked down at me. Then she came down. I watched this footage in a hospital bed with 2 cracked ribs and a fractured shoulder. 6 months pregnant with my husband getting in the waiting area, being managed by the woman who had just pushed me down a flight of stairs. And I felt something very specific and very cold settle into my chest. I felt the case come together. "The kitchen footage," I said. Marcus pulled up the second recording. It was from 2 days before the fall, a Friday evening when I had been at a client dinner and Connor had been in the office late, and Margaret had been alone in the house. The kitchen camera was positioned above the refrigerator, angled toward the central counter. The footage showed Margaret entering the kitchen at 9:47 p.m. She went to the cabinet where the herbal tea was kept. She took the container down. She opened the cabinet under the sink where I kept various household items, and she retrieved a small bottle that I did not recognize, a dark glass bottle with no visible label. She opened the tea container. She opened the dark glass bottle. She used a small measuring spoon, the kind that comes in a set with quarter teaspoon and half teaspoon increments, to add something from the bottle to the tea container. She mixed it with a small wooden spoon. She replaced the lids on both containers. She put the tea container back in the upper cabinet and the dark glass bottle back under the sink behind the cleaning supplies. She washed the measuring spoon and the wooden spoon separately from the other dishes in the drying rack, dried them immediately, and returned them to the drawer. Then she made herself a cup of chamomile tea from a different container, her own from the pantry, and went back to the living room. The whole sequence took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I watched it without saying anything. Marcus watched me watch it. When it ended, I looked at the ceiling for a moment. I thought about the 6 weeks of nausea I had attributed to pregnancy. I thought about the cramping. I thought about the blood panel results, with their anomalous numbers that my doctor had noted and would note again. "The bottle under the sink," I said. "Still there?" Marcus asked. "I didn't touch anything under that sink after I found the tea container," I said. I was preserving potential evidence. Marcus looked at me with the expression of a former federal prosecutor who has just been reminded why he considers me the best litigator he has ever worked with. "I'll need to have someone retrieve it," he said. "Chain of custody." "Call Rebecca Moss," I said. Rebecca was a forensic evidence specialist who had worked as a consultant on 3 of our cases. "Tell her this is urgent. Tell her I need the bottle retrieved, cataloged, and tested before anyone else has access to that house." "When do you expect to be discharged?" "Tomorrow morning, if the fetal monitoring continues to be clear." I paused. "Margaret will go back to the house tonight. She'll expect to find it undisturbed." "And you want it to be undisturbed," Marcus said. "I want her to believe it's undisturbed," I said. "I want her to believe the bottle is still there and that I have no idea about it. I want her to feel safe." Marcus looked at me steadily. "And Connor?" "Connor knows about the fall," I said. "He knows about the camera. He doesn't know about the tea. Not yet." "Why not yet?" "Because if Connor knows about the tea and he confronts his mother, she removes the bottle. She destroys evidence. She constructs a defense. I held Marcus's gaze. I need 48 more hours of her believing she has won before I show her what I have. Marcus closed his laptop. "You've been building this for 3 weeks," he said. "I've been building this since the first month of my marriage," I said. "I just didn't know it was a case yet." Connor and I had discussed the trust extensively before we married. He had been transparent about it in the way of someone who has grown up with complicated money and has decided that transparency is the only way to have an honest relationship with anyone. Senator Richard Walsh had established the trust in 2008, funded primarily by the proceeds of the sale of a commercial real estate portfolio he had built over 20 years. The portfolio had included office buildings in Virginia and Maryland, a retail center in Delaware, and a residential development outside of Baltimore that had, at the time of the sale, been worth substantially more than anyone had expected. The trust was currently worth approximately $18 million in liquid assets, with an additional $8 million in 2 remaining commercial properties that had not been sold, a leased office building in Alexandria, and a mixed-use development in Bethesda that was currently under renovation. These properties generated approximately $680,000 in annual income, a portion of which flowed to Margaret's living expenses, and a portion of which was reinvested into the trust principal. Margaret's access to this income was under the terms of the trust contingent on the absence of a grandchild. The moment a biological grandchild of Richard and Margaret Walsh was born, the trust restructured 51% of the principal transferred to the grandchild's custodial account, and Margaret's access to the income dropped proportionally. In practical terms, this meant that the birth of our daughter would reduce Margaret's annual income from the trust by approximately $350,000. This was not a trivial reduction. Margaret Walsh lived in a manner consistent with $680,000 per year in trust income. She had a house in McLean that was worth $3.4 million and cost approximately $80,000 per year to maintain. She had the country club memberships and the European travel and the wardrobe of a woman who had been married to a senator and intended to live like it indefinitely. What she did not have was independent wealth. Senator Richard Walsh had known this. The trust structure was, in retrospect, a correction, the financial expression of a man who had seen his wife's spending habits clearly and had designed a mechanism to limit them while still providing for her. He had also perhaps seen something else, something about the specific quality of his wife's relationship with their son and their son's future family. Marcus had pulled the trust documents the morning after the fall, working from the copies Connor had provided to me 3 years ago and cross-referencing with the public records from the probate proceedings. What Marcus found in the fine print was something I had read 3 years ago and filed away, and that had now become the most important paragraph in the document. The paragraph read in the specific language of estate law. In the event that the trustee's primary beneficiary, Margaret Claire Walsh, is found to have engaged in conduct materially adverse to the interests of the trust's future beneficiaries, including, but not limited to, any biological children or grandchildren of the grantor, the trustee shall have the authority to petition the court for removal of the primary beneficiary and reallocation of the remaining trust assets to the secondary beneficiaries. Conduct materially adverse to the interests of the trust's future beneficiaries. I had read this provision 3 years ago and thought, this is well-drafted protective language probably inserted by the senator's estate attorneys as a standard provision. I had filed it away as interesting and moved on. I was reading it now differently, attempting to poison a pregnant grandchild in utero, pushing the grandchild's mother down a flight of stairs at 6 months gestation. These were without question conduct materially adverse to the interests of a trust's future beneficiary. If I could prove both, and I could prove both, Margaret Walsh would not merely face criminal charges. She would lose everything. I was discharged from the hospital on Monday morning with my right arm in a sling, a follow-up appointment scheduled for Thursday, and a set of very clear fetal monitoring instructions that my OB delivered with the quiet, precise concern of someone who understood what I had been through and what it meant. Connor drove me home. Margaret was in the back seat. She had offered to sit in the back so I could have the front seat, which was an offer constructed to appear considerate while ensuring she was behind me where I could not see her face. I was aware of every breath she took during that 20-minute drive. The house looked the same when we arrived. I went upstairs, slowly Connor beside me, and I went into the bedroom, and I lay down, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the next 48 hours. Connor sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at me with the expression he had been wearing since the hospital, the expression of a man who is managing something enormous and doing it without the benefit of knowing the full picture. "I need to tell you about the tea," I said. I told him. I told him about the repositioned container, about the research, about the blood panel, about the kitchen camera and what it showed, about the dark glass bottle under the sink. Connor listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. He was looking at his hands. "She's been in this house," he said finally. "Doing this while you were sleeping in the next room," I said. "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "I needed to build the case first," I said. "I needed documentation that couldn't be challenged. If I had told you 3 weeks ago, you would have confronted her, and she would have removed the evidence, and we would have had a conflict and no proof." Connor looked at me. "You were protecting the case." "I was protecting our daughter," I said. "The case is the means." He was quiet again. Then, "What do you need me to do?" "For the next 48 hours. I said, I need you to be exactly the same with your mother as you have been. Concerned, slightly overwhelmed, relieved that the baby is okay. I need her to believe that the fall was an accident, that I am recovering, and that nothing has changed." And in 48 hours, I said, "Marcus will have the forensic analysis of the bottle. The footage will be in the hands of the detectives I am going to contact tomorrow, and I will have filed the first of several legal motions." I paused. "And then I'm going to invite your mother to dinner." Connor looked at me with an expression that was, I thought, equal parts admiration and something close to fear. "Serena," he said. "I know," I said. "She's my mother." "I know," I said again. "And she tried to kill our daughter. Twice." I held his gaze. "She doesn't get to be your mother anymore. She gets to be a defendant." Connor looked at his hands again. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortably, but weightily, the silence of two people standing at a threshold that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. "I'm with you," he said. "Whatever you need." "Thank you," I said. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the house, the ambient noise of a home I had chosen, carefully furnished deliberately, and was now prepared to defend with the full weight of everything I knew. The 48 hours were a masterclass in the management of information. Rebecca Moss arrived at the house on Monday afternoon under the cover of a story. Connor told Margaret that Rebecca was a friend stopping by to check on me. Margaret was in the living room. Rebecca was in the kitchen for 11 minutes. She photographed the cabinet under the sink before touching anything. She retrieved the dark glass bottle using gloved hands and placed it in an evidence bag. She photographed the space where the bottle had been. She left without Margaret knowing she had been anywhere except the bedroom to see me. The bottle was at the lab by 3 p.m. Monday. Rebecca called at 7 a.m. Tuesday with preliminary results. The bottle contained a concentrated liquid extract of blue cohosh. The concentration was approximately 4 times higher than the levels found in commercial herbal preparations. At the doses documented in the kitchen footage, a half teaspoon added to a weekly tea supply, the cumulative exposure over 6 weeks would have been sufficient, according to the toxicologist Rebecca consulted, to cause significant uterine stress, and with continued exposure, a high probability of preterm labor before viability. Our daughter had been 6 weeks away from being killed before she was born. I received this information in my home office on Tuesday morning, sitting at my desk with my right arm in a sling and my laptop open to the trust documents I had been reviewing. I received it and I processed it, and I set the phone down and I sat for exactly 2 minutes with my hands flat on the desk. Then I picked up the phone and called the detective I had spoken with the previous afternoon, Detective Yolanda Reeves of the Metropolitan Police Department. Major Crimes Unit had received my call Monday afternoon with the professional skepticism of someone who has taken many calls from many people, describing many alleged crimes, and who has learned to distinguish between the calls that require immediate action and the calls that require patience. She had listened to my preliminary account, the fall, the footage, the tea, and she had asked precise questions, and by the end of the call, her professional skepticism had shifted into professional attention. I had sent her the footage Monday evening through Marcus via the secure file transfer protocol the department used for digital evidence. I had sent her the contemporaneous memo I had written 3 weeks earlier, the blood panel results, and Rebecca Moss's preliminary forensic report on the tea container. When I called her Tuesday morning with the blue cohosh findings, she said, "I'm bringing a partner. Can we come this afternoon?" "Yes," I said. "My mother-in-law will be out at 3. She has a standing appointment at a salon in Georgetown on Tuesday afternoons. She has never missed it in the 3 years I have been married." "You know her schedule," Detective Reeves said. "I have been living with this woman for the past 4 days," I said, "and paying attention to her for 3 years. Yes, I know her schedule." A brief pause. "You're a lawyer?" "Litigation attorney," I said. "Yes." "You've been building a case." "I've been documenting facts," I said. The case assembled itself. Detectives Reeves and her partner, Detective James Okafor, no relation to my family name, arrived at 3:15. They sat in my home office and they reviewed everything I had assembled, the footage, the forensic reports, the memo, the blood panel, the trust documents, the provision about conduct materially adverse to future beneficiaries. They asked questions for 90 minutes. At the end of 90 minutes, Detective Reeves closed her notebook. "We'll need to bring her in for questioning," she said. "I know," I said. "I have a request about the timing." "What's the request?" "I want to be present when she realizes what I have," I said. "Not as a witness to her arrest, as myself. I want her to understand in a room what she did and what it cost her, before the lawyers and the charges and the procedural distance that criminal proceedings create. I want one moment of direct truth." Detective Reeves looked at me for a moment. "That's unusual," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm asking anyway." She considered this. "We can't officially sanction." "I'm not asking for official sanction," I said. "I'm asking for a 24-hour window before you move on the arrest warrant. That's all." Another pause. "24 hours," she said. "Don't do anything that would compromise the case." "I'm a litigation attorney," I said. "I have no interest in compromising the case. The case is the point." Margaret Walsh had excellent instincts for social performance. This was, I had observed over 3 years, her primary skill, the ability to read a room and calibrate her presentation accordingly. She knew without being told when she was being watched versus ignored. She knew when charm was required and when authority would serve better. She had navigated 40 years of political social life with the instincts of a professional, and those instincts had served her extremely well. What those instincts could not detect was the specific quality of silence I had been trained to maintain. The silence of a litigator who has the evidence and is waiting for the right moment to present it. The silence that looks from the outside like recovery. On Tuesday evening, I told Margaret I wanted to have dinner together, just the 3 of us, Connor and Margaret and I, at home. I said I had been feeling better and I wanted to do something normal, and I had asked Connor to cook because cooking was one of the things he did when he was managing difficult emotions, and the act of making dinner together would help all of us. Margaret accepted. She accepted with the warmth she produced in moments when she believed she had won. And the warmth was, I thought, genuine in its way, the genuine warmth of someone who believes the threat has passed. I spent Tuesday afternoon in my office reviewing the documents one last time. I reviewed the trust provision. I reviewed the forensic report. I reviewed the footage timestamps. I reviewed the contemporaneous memo I had written 3 weeks earlier and the clean factual record it established. Then I changed out of my work clothes and put on a dress I had specifically chosen, not formal, not casual, the specific register of someone who has made themselves presentable for an important occasion. And I went downstairs to set the table. Connor had made pasta. He was good at pasta. It was the dish he had made for me on our third date, and it had been part of the architecture of our relationship since. He made it now with the focused attention of someone who needed something to do with his hands, and the kitchen smelled of garlic and good olive oil and the specific comfort of a meal made by someone who loves you. Margaret came downstairs at 7:15 in a cashmere sweater and her characteristic pearls, and she sat at the table with the composure of someone who has dressed for an occasion they believe they have already won. We ate. The conversation was careful and surface level in the way of family dinners conducted over unacknowledged fault lines, the Weather Connors project in Boston, a friend of Margaret's who was having a renovation done. I ate my pasta and listened and said the right things at the right moments and watched Margaret relax incrementally with each minute that passed without confrontation. When Connor cleared the plates and went to the kitchen for dessert, Margaret looked at me across the table with something that might, in a different version of this story, have been almost maternal. "I'm glad you're feeling better," she said. "Yesterday was very frightening." "It was," I said. "These things happen," she said. "Pregnancy throws off your balance. You should be more careful on the stairs." I looked at her. "I've been thinking about that," I said pleasantly, "about what happened on the stairs." "You just need to slow down," she said. "You work too hard. You always have. It's not good for the baby." "I've been thinking about it quite a bit," I said. "I've been thinking about the camera." A very small pause, nearly imperceptible. But I am a litigator, and I have spent 15 years watching people's faces when information arrives that they were not expecting. "What camera?" she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "The security camera I installed at the top of the staircase," I said. "3 weeks ago." Silence. "It has a wide-angle lens," I said, "and directional audio. It recorded our conversation in the hallway, and then it recorded what happened next." Margaret's face did not change dramatically. She was too practiced for dramatic changes. But something in the architecture of her expression, the specific arrangement of muscle and intention that constitutes a face, shifted in a way that I recognized. It was the shift of a witness who has just understood the scope of what the opposing counsel has. "I don't know what you think it shows," she said. "I know what it shows," I said. "I've watched it. Marcus has watched it. The detectives who came to the house this afternoon have watched it." The word detectives produced a response she could not entirely control, a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible increase in the rigidity of her posture. "And I've been thinking about the kitchen camera," I said. "The one I installed above the refrigerator, the one that recorded you in the kitchen on Friday evening when Connor and I were both out." Connor came back from the kitchen with a small plate of fruit. He set it on the table and sat down and looked between us with the expression of someone who has known this moment was coming and is holding himself very still. "What were you adding to the tea, Margaret?" I said. The question landed in the room with the specific weight of a question that has been prepared with complete evidence behind it. "I have no idea what your blue cohosh," I said. "Concentrated liquid extract. The bottle is currently in a forensic laboratory. The analysis confirms it. The kitchen footage shows you retrieving the bottle from under the sink and adding it to the herbal tea you had given me as a gift." I paused. "The herbal tea you watched me drink every evening. The herbal tea you specifically recommended to a woman who was 6 months pregnant." Margaret was very still. Blue cohosh in the concentrations you were administering would have caused preterm labor before viability, I said. Our daughter would not have survived. She would have been born too early to survive, and the trust provision would not have triggered, and your income would have remained intact. And no one would have known it was anything other than a tragic pregnancy loss. I held her gaze, except that I noticed the tea container had been battered. And I researched everything, and I installed a camera. Connor. Margaret turned to her son. Her voice had changed. The composure was cracking at the edges, replaced by something that was half appeal and half command. Connor, I've seen the footage, Mom, Connor said. His voice was very quiet. Both of them. Margaret looked at her son. Something moved across her face that was, I thought, the most genuine emotion I had ever seen from her. Not remorse, not guilt, but the specific grief of someone who has been caught by the person they least wanted to catch them. The trust, she said. Finally, the word came out without the performance around it. Yes, I said. You don't understand what it's like, she said, to watch everything you've built. You tried to kill my daughter, I said, before she was born. And when that didn't work fast enough, you pushed me down a flight of stairs. I kept my voice level. I don't want your explanation. I want you to understand the position you are in. Margaret looked at the table. The footage goes to the DA's office tomorrow, I said. The forensic report on the blue cohosh is already in the detective's file. The trust provision about conduct materially adverse to future beneficiaries is attached to a motion my firm has drafted and will file the moment criminal proceedings begin. I folded my hands on the table. You will be charged with attempted murder. 2 counts the poisoning and the fall. Depending on how the DA characterizes the premeditated nature of the poisoning, you may be looking at additional charges. Your attorneys will advise you on the specifics. And the trust, she said. Her voice was barely audible. Under the provision, your husband's estate attorneys included. I said, criminal conduct materially adverse to the interests of future beneficiaries triggers removal of the primary beneficiary. You will lose your access to the trust income entirely. The trustee will petition the court for reallocation, and given that you will be facing criminal charges at the time of that petition, I expect the reallocation to be granted. I paused. Our daughter will be fine. The trust will be intact for her. You will have lost everything you tried to protect. Margaret was very still. The pearls at her throat rose and fell with her breathing. The Alexandria building, I said. The Bethesda development. The McLean house. All of it will be subject to the reallocation petition and any civil claims we file. I looked at her directly. You spent 40 years protecting a lifestyle. You tried to murder a child to preserve it, and you lost it anyway. Connor reached across the table and took my hand without saying anything. Margaret looked at her son's hand holding mine. She looked at the table. She looked at the fruit plate that Connor had brought from the kitchen, incongruously normal, in the middle of this conversation. Then she pushed her chair back and stood up and walked out of the dining room. We heard her footsteps on the stairs. We heard the guest room door close. Connor looked at me. Is she going to run? He said. No, I said. She has nowhere to go, and she knows it. I looked at our joined hands. And she's going to want to call her attorney before she does anything else, which means she's going to be on the phone for the next 2 hours. And by the time her attorney explains to her exactly what I just explained to her, she's going to understand that running would only make it worse. How do you know she'll call her attorney and not just? Because Margaret Walsh has spent her entire life using lawyers to solve her problems, I said. She's going to call one now. It's the only thing she knows how to do. I squeezed his hand. And her attorney is going to tell her the same thing I just told her, except in legal language. And she is going to have a very long night. Connor was quiet for a moment. Then, Are you okay? I thought about this seriously the way I think about everything. I thought about the 6 weeks of nausea that had not been pregnancy symptoms. I thought about 30 seconds on the landing with 2 cracked ribs. I thought about the sound of my daughter's heartbeat on the fetal monitor in the emergency room. I will be, I said. The guest room door stayed closed for 4 hours. Connor and I sat at the dining room table for a while, after Margaret went upstairs not talking the way people sit after a significant event has passed, and the adrenaline is still present, but the immediate urgency is gone. Connor poured himself a glass of water. I ate the fruit he had brought from the kitchen because I was 6 months pregnant and my body required fuel regardless of the circumstances. At some point, I said, "She's going to deny the push. The footage, she'll say the footage is ambiguous, that her hands were on my back but she was trying to stop me from falling, not cause it. That the angle doesn't clearly show the direction of force." I had been thinking about this since Monday morning. The push is the harder charge to make stick because it's 2 seconds of footage at an angle that a good defense attorney will argue is inconclusive. Connor looked at me. "And the T is the better case," I said. "The footage of her adding the substance is unambiguous. The forensic analysis of the bottle is scientific evidence. The blood panel showing anomalous results predates my installation of the camera, which establishes a timeline that supports deliberate ongoing conduct rather than a one-time event." I paused. The T is attempted murder. The push might be charged as assault, or it might be charged as attempted murder if the DA can establish premeditation and intent. But the T is the foundation. Connor was quiet for a moment. "You said 2 counts of attempted murder at dinner." I said she may face 2 counts. Whether the DA charges both as attempted murder depends on how they assess the evidence and what they can prove to the required standard. I shifted in my chair, the movement pulling at my cracked ribs in a way I was learning to manage. The T combined with the footage, combined with the forensic report and the blood panel, gives the DA a strong case on the poisoning count. The push adds the fall. Together, they establish a pattern of conduct that will be very difficult for her attorney to explain. "She's going to say she didn't know blue cohosh was dangerous," Connor said. "She's going to say a lot of things," I said. "Her attorney is going to tell her what to say." "That's fine. The footage shows deliberate measurement of the dose. You don't measure a dose of something you don't know is dangerous." Connor put his glass down. He looked at his hands. "She must have been planning this," he said, "for longer than 3 weeks. "Yes," I said. "The fact that she brought the bottle with her suggests she came prepared. She had it with her when she arrived, which means she made the decision to do this before she walked through our door." This landed heavily in the room between us. The specific weight of it, that his mother had driven to our home with a bottle of blue cohosh extract and a plan, was something Connor was going to be processing for a long time. I was aware of this. I was aware that the legal case and the personal devastation were 2 separate things, and that I could manage the legal case and could not manage the personal devastation for him. He was going to have to do that himself over a much longer period than the 48 hours I had been managing the evidence. At 11 p.m., I heard Margaret's voice through the guest room door. She was on the phone. The words were not audible through the door, but the cadence was the specific rhythm of a person being told things they do not want to hear and periodically objecting to them. "Her attorney," I said. Connor nodded. We went to bed. I lay on my left side, the only comfortable position with the cracked ribs, and I listened to the house settle around me, and I thought about everything that was going to happen in the next 72 hours. And I went through it methodically, the way I go through a case before trial. Every motion, every argument, every response to every anticipated counter-argument. I fell asleep somewhere in the middle of the 3rd anticipated objection to the trust petition. Margaret came downstairs at 7 a.m. looking like someone who had not slept and had spent the hours since dinner doing something that had cost her considerably. She was composed. I will give her that. Margaret Walsh was even at her worst composed. She had been trained to composure by 40 years of political social life, and she deployed it now with the automatic precision of a reflex. She poured herself coffee. Connor was in the kitchen making eggs. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea that I had made myself from a container I had purchased and Connor had opened in front of me. Margaret looked at me. I looked at her. "My attorney will be in touch with yours," she said. Her voice was measured and contained. "Marcus Chen," I said. "He's already expecting the call." She poured her coffee and went back upstairs. Connor looked at me over the eggs. "Is that it?" he said. "For now," I said. "Her attorney has told her not to engage with me directly. She's following instructions." That's actually helpful to us. It means she's not going to say anything inadvertently that would need to be managed. She's not going to leave, I said. Her attorney has told her leaving looks like flight, and flight looks like consciousness of guilt. She's going to stay in this house and say nothing, and wait for her legal team to tell her what the options are. And what are the options? Her attorney is going to tell her the options are limited. I said. The footage is clear on the T. The forensic analysis is solid. The blood panel corroborates chronic exposure. She could argue the push was accidental, but the T is harder to argue. Her best-case scenario is a plea arrangement that limits the criminal exposure in exchange for something cooperation, a specific admission, a civil settlement that resolves the trust question without full litigation. I paused. That's not going to happen. I'm not interested in a settlement that lets her keep access to the trust income. Connor brought the eggs to the table and sat down. What are you interested in? He said. A full accounting, I said, of what she did and why. On the record. In a proceeding where it cannot be disputed or minimized. I looked at him. Our daughter is going to grow up. She's going to be old enough to understand what happened before she was born. I want the record to be clean and complete. I want her to be able to read a court transcript and understand exactly what occurred and exactly what the consequences were. Connor was quiet for a moment. That's not just about the case. No, I said. It's not. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. We sat like that for a while in the kitchen that had been the site of a crime, and was also the kitchen where we made breakfast on Saturday mornings, and I thought about how places hold both things simultaneously, the ordinary and the terrible, and how you learn to live in a place that has been the site of something terrible by insisting on also filling it with ordinary things. I ate my eggs. Marcus filed the first motion on Wednesday morning. It was a petition to the court overseeing Senator Walsh's estate, requesting an emergency order to freeze Margaret's access to the trust income, pending the outcome of a criminal investigation into conduct materially adverse to the interests of a future trust beneficiary. The petition was accompanied by 57 pages of attachments, the video footage, the forensic report, the blood panel, the contemporaneous memo, the toxicology analysis of the blue cohosh extract, and a detailed legal brief arguing the applicability of the trust's adverse conduct provision. Marcus had worked through Tuesday night on the brief. It was, I thought, when I read it at 6 a.m. Wednesday, the best piece of legal writing he had ever produced, precise, well-documented and structured with the specific clarity of someone who has built a case from the foundation up and knows exactly where every supporting element is located. The estate court judge was a woman named Patricia Donnelly, who had been on the bench for 22 years and who had, according to Marcus, a comprehensive intolerance for what she called creative estate management, the specific practice of wealthy families manipulating trust structures to serve the interests of one party over the clearly expressed wishes of the grantor. Judge Donnelly reviewed the petition in 90 minutes. She issued the emergency freeze order the same day. Margaret's access to the trust income was suspended effective immediately pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings and the full hearing on the petition. I received the notice of the freeze order at 11:30 a.m. Wednesday, while I was in a follow-up appointment with my orthopedic surgeon. I read it on my phone in the waiting room and felt something that I want to describe accurately because accuracy matters in this account. Not triumph, not satisfactions, but a specific settled sense of things being in their correct configuration. The evidence had been assembled. The motion had been filed. The court had reviewed the evidence and found it sufficient to act. This is how the system is supposed to work, and when it works, as it is supposed to work, the feeling is not victory, but correctness. The orthopedic surgeon told me the shoulder fracture was healing well, and that with consistent physical therapy, I would have full range of motion restored within 4 to 6 months. I thanked him and went back to my car and called Marcus. "The freeze is in place," he said. "I know. I read the order." I paused. "Has her attorney called 20 minutes ago?" he said. "He wants to discuss a resolution." "Tell him I'll speak with him Friday afternoon," I said. "Tell him to have a specific proposal ready. Not a framework, not a concept, a specific proposal with numbers and terms. I don't have time for preliminary conversations. He's not going to like that timeline." "I know," I said. "That's part of the point." Margaret's attorney was a man named Gerald Fitch, who had been a prominent estate and family law attorney in the D.C. area for 30 years, and whose reputation was built primarily on his ability to manage wealthy clients through complicated family legal situations with minimal public exposure. He was known for discretion and for settlements for making problems go away quietly in ways that left his clients' public reputations intact. He was not, in other words, a criminal defense attorney. He was an estate attorney who had been called by a client in a crisis and who was now operating somewhat outside his area of genuine expertise. I knew this about him. I had looked him up Tuesday afternoon. Gerald Fitch arrived at our firm on Friday at 2 p.m. He was 61 years old, well-dressed in the specific way of established Washington attorneys, and he carried himself with the particular combination of confidence and wariness of someone who has assessed the situation and has a realistic understanding of the disadvantages of his position. Marcus and I met him in the conference room. I had my right arm in a sling. I had my laptop, a printed copy of the trust documents, and a copy of every motion we had filed or were prepared to file. Fitch looked at my arm in the sling. He looked at my face. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Ms. Okafor Walsh," he said. "Mr. Fitch," I said. "I understand you have a proposal." He opened his briefcase. The proposal Margaret Walsh's attorney put on the table was as proposals from people in losing positions often are an attempt to reframe the situation as something other than what it was. He proposed a civil settlement Margaret would acknowledge certain behaviors. The language was deliberately vague, and would agree to a restructuring of her trust access that reduced her annual income by a specified amount. In exchange, we would agree not to pursue the criminal charges, or more precisely, not to encourage their pursuit. He was careful to note that the DA's office made its own decisions and that we could not technically withdraw a criminal complaint. He also proposed with the careful casualness of someone who has buried the most important thing in the middle of a longer list that we agree to a confidentiality provision that would restrict public discussion of the events. I let him finish. I waited 3 full seconds after he finished before I spoke. "No," I said. Fitch looked at me. "No to the civil settlement. No to the restructured trust access. No to the confidentiality provision," I said. "I want to be direct with you about why so that when you report back to your client, she understands the reasoning and not just the outcome." Fitch folded his hands on the table. "Your client came to my home with a premeditated plan to end my pregnancy," I said. "She had the blue cohosh extract with her when she arrived. The footage shows she administered it deliberately with a measured dose, in a manner designed to cause uterine distress in a pregnant woman. This is not a behavioral anomaly. This is a plan. The fall down the stairs occurred 6 weeks after she began the poisoning, at a point when the poisoning had not yet produced the results she wanted. The fall is the backup plan." Fitch maintained his composure. He was a professional. A civil settlement that resolves this privately with a confidentiality provision accomplishes two things, I continued. It protects Margaret Walsh from the criminal consequences of attempted murder, and it protects her from the reputational consequences of being publicly identified as a woman who tried to kill her grandchild in utero. I paused. I have no interest in either outcome. Ms. Okafor Walsh, Fitch said carefully, the criminal proceeding will be difficult for everyone involved, including you and your husband. The public nature of a trial. I'm a litigation attorney, I said. I have spent 15 years in public proceedings. I understand the nature of trials. Your husband, my husband, supports this decision, I said. We have discussed it fully. Fitch was quiet for a moment. He was a smart man. He had the look of someone recalculating in real time. Is there anything that would change your position? Yes, I said. A complete admission of both the poisoning and the push, delivered in a sworn statement before criminal charges are formally filed. No negotiated language, no minimization, a full, factual account of what she did and why. The trust petition proceeds without opposition, and her access to the trust income is permanently revoked. She does not contest the reallocation to our daughter's custodial account. I looked at him directly. In exchange for that complete admission and that uncontested reallocation, I will recommend to the DA that they consider the admission as a mitigating factor in sentencing. Not in charging, she will still be charged, but in sentencing. Fitch was very still. That's not a settlement, he said. No, I said. It's a framework for a guilty plea. If your client wants to spare herself a trial, this is the only path I'm prepared to discuss. My client maintains that the events at the top of the staircase were… Mr. Fitch, I said, I have footage. I turned my laptop to face him and pressed play. I watched Gerald Fitch watch the video. I watched the moment the footage showed Margaret's hands, and I watched the moment his professional composure absorbed the reality of what he was looking at, and I watched him understand. I'll convey your position to my client, he said. Thank you, I said. My door is open through end of business Monday. The legal architecture of what I was building was clear to me in a way that the personal architecture was not. Because legal architecture is my professional domain and personal architecture is something else entirely. Connor was struggling. I want to be honest about this because I have told you a story that is in one dimension, a story about strategy and evidence and the proper function of the legal system, and in another dimension, it is a story about a man who discovered that his mother had tried to kill his unborn daughter, and those two dimensions require different languages, and I am more fluent in one than the other. Connor had known on some level that his mother was capable of things she presented as something else. He had grown up in that house. He had watched his father manage her for 40 years with the patient, slightly exhausted diplomacy of a man who has made a decision about what he can and cannot change. He had, in the 3 years of our marriage, watched her manage me, the specific combination of condescension and performance that characterized her relationship with me, and had sometimes intervened and sometimes not, and the sometimes not had been a source of tension between us that we had never fully resolved. He had not expected this. There is a difference between knowing someone is capable of manipulation and knowing they are capable of attempted murder. The distance between those two things is the distance between a family dysfunction and a crime. And crossing that distance required Connor to reconstruct his understanding of his mother in a fundamental way. Not refine it, not update it, reconstruct it from different materials. I watched him do this over the week after the dinner, and I was aware that I could not do it for him and that trying to would be counterproductive. What I could do was be present and not perform anything I did not feel and not ask him to process on my timeline rather than his. He asked me on Thursday evening whether I had known all along, whether I had married him knowing that his mother was dangerous rather than merely difficult. No, I said. I knew she was difficult. I knew she was hostile to me specifically. I didn't know she was capable of this until 3 weeks ago. When you noticed the tea container? Yes. And then you built the case instead of telling me? Yes. He was quiet for a while. We were sitting on the back deck, the first evening, warm enough to sit outside since the fall, a late October evening that had held its warmth past sunset. The garden Connor had planted in the spring was browning at the edges in the specific way of gardens at the end of their season. I keep thinking, he said, about the mornings she made you the smoothies. I was in the shower. She would bring them to you at the kitchen table before I came down. She presented it as caring. She said she wanted to help with the nausea. He paused. And I thought she was trying. She was trying, I said. She was trying to end the pregnancy. The bluntness of this was, I recognized, not kind. But it was accurate. And I had decided early in this process that accuracy was more useful than gentleness. Connor could handle accurate. What he could not handle, I thought, was a softened version that left him room to construct a narrative in which his mother had just made a mistake, had just been confused, had just acted from fear rather than intent. She had not acted from fear. She had acted from calculation. The measured doses, the deliberate timing, the concealment. These were the actions of a person who had made a plan and was executing it. The fear, if there was fear, was underneath the calculation powering it. But calculation is not mitigated by the fear beneath it. I'm angry at myself, Connor said. Why? Because I saw enough to know something was wrong. The way she talked to you when she thought I wasn't listening. The way she told me 3 months after we got married that you had only married me for the trust. She said it once and then never said it again, but she said it. He looked at the garden. I confronted her about it. She cried and said she was just worried about me and that she had said it badly, and I let it go. You let it go because it seemed like one bad moment, I said. Not because you were negligent. Most people, when their mother says something cruel once and then apologizes, don't conclude that she's capable of attempted murder. Most people's mothers aren't. No, I said, they're not. We sat for a while longer. The light was fading and the garden was getting dark at the edges. The baby, Connor said. She's fine, I said. The last monitoring showed everything within normal range. My OB is doing weekly checks now as a precaution, but the residual exposure doesn't appear to have caused any lasting issues. I want to be in the room when she's born, he said. I know it doesn't need to be said, but I want to say it. I know, I said. I want to be the kind of father who is in the room, he said. Not the kind who's in the waiting area trying to manage someone else's crisis. I looked at him. You will be, I said. You already are. He reached over and put his hand on my uninjured shoulder carefully, with the specific care of someone who has learned in the past week to be careful about which parts of me he touches. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For not seeing it sooner. For not… Connor, I said. You came to the hospital at midnight. You believed me before you saw the footage. You have not wavered once in any conversation from my side of this. I paused. You don't need to apologize for not being a forensic accountant. You need to stop carrying guilt for your mother's choices. He was quiet. That's harder than it sounds, he said. I know, I said. It's going to take time. How much time? I don't know, I said honestly. A long time. Maybe always in some form. But the form changes. It gets lighter. I paused. My father's mother was not a good person. She died when I was 12, and I spent years after that carrying grief about the relationship I thought we'd never had. And then I spent more years understanding that the grief was not about what I had lost, but about what had never existed. The grief for the thing that never existed is different from the grief for the thing that did. Connor looked at me. "You've never told me that before," he said. "I'm telling you now because it's relevant," I said. "You are grieving a mother who, as she actually existed, tried to kill your daughter. The mother you thought she was the one who was difficult, but still, your mother, that woman, was a performance. She was never real." I paused. "That's the grief you're carrying, and it is real grief regardless of what she did. Grief for a version of someone that never actually existed is still grief." Connor looked at the garden for a long time. "Okay," he said finally. Not a resolution, just an acknowledgement. "Okay, I am hearing you. I am holding this." That was enough. He called on Monday at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before my end of business deadline. "My client has reviewed your proposal," he said. His voice had the quality of a man delivering news he finds professionally distasteful. "She is prepared to enter a sworn statement admitting to the addition of blue cohosh extract to the herbal tea preparation over a period of approximately 6 weeks. And the fall," I said. A pause. "My client maintains that the events at the top of the staircase were Mr. Fitch," I said. "I have footage that shows both hands applied force and the trajectory of the fall. My client, which is to say myself, is not interested in a partial admission. Complete means complete." Another pause. Longer this time. "My client is prepared to admit to making contact with Ms. Okafor Walsh at the top of the staircase in a manner that caused her to fall," he said. "She maintains that the force applied was not intended to cause serious injury." Stop. "The force applied caused 2 cracked ribs, a fractured shoulder, and could have caused the death of a 6-month fetus," I said. "The DA will make the determination about intent. What I need from your client is a factual admission of the contact and the force without qualifications about intent. The qualifications are for the sentencing hearing, not the sworn statement. Ms. Okafor Walsh, you're asking my client to essentially confess to—" "I'm asking your client to tell the truth," I said. "In sworn form, which is what every person in every legal proceeding is asked to do." A long pause. "My client will admit to the contact at the top of the staircase," Fitch said. "She will admit that she placed both hands on Ms. Okafor Walsh's upper back and that the contact resulted in Ms. Okafor Walsh's fall. Without qualification about intent in the sworn statement itself," I said. "Without qualification," he said. The words came out with the specific reluctance of a man who has advised his client against this and lost the argument. "And the trust petition," I said. "My client will not oppose the reallocation petition," he said. "She will withdraw her status as primary beneficiary and consent to the reallocation of the trust principal to the minor child's custodial account." "Without contest or delay," I said. "I want this resolved before my daughter is born. My client understands the timeline. And the McLean house," I said. "I assume your client's counsel has advised her on the civil exposure. The trust reallocation covers the principal, but the civil damages from the assault, the medical expenses, the lost work, the pain and suffering, those are separate." Fitch was silent for a moment. "My client is prepared to discuss a civil settlement figure." "Marcus will handle that conversation," I said. "He'll call you tomorrow morning." I ended the call and sat in my office for a moment in the specific quiet that follows the conclusion of a significant negotiation. Not triumph, correctness. The evidence had produced the appropriate result. The legal mechanisms had functioned as they were designed to function. The person who had committed the acts had admitted to the acts and would face the consequences. I called Marcus. "She's admitting to both," I said. "Full sworn statement, trust petition uncontested, civil damages to be negotiated. The DA. I'll call Detective Reeves this evening," I said. "The sworn statement is a significant piece for them." Combined with the footage and the forensic evidence, the criminal case is very strong. The admission adds to it. I paused. I told Fitch I would recommend the DA consider the admission as a mitigating factor in sentencing. You'll actually make that recommendation? Yes, I said. I said I would, and I mean it. What I told Fitch is true. I'm not in a position to change the charging decision, and I'm not trying to. I want her charged. I want the record to be complete and public. But if she is cooperating and has given a sworn admission, it's appropriate for me to note that cooperation in any victim impact statement context. You're going to write a victim impact statement, Marcus said. I'm going to write the most thoroughly documented victim impact statement the DC Criminal Court has ever received, I said. Marcus laughed a short, genuine laugh. I believe you. The trust reallocation hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after the sworn statement was filed. Judge Donnelly had reviewed the statement, the forensic evidence, and the criminal charges that had been filed in the interim. Margaret Walsh had been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of assault causing serious bodily injury, and had set the hearing on an expedited docket, noting in her scheduling order that the matter involved a pending birth and required timely resolution. I was 8 months pregnant when I walked into Judge Donnelly's courtroom. My shoulder was out of the sling. By then, the fracture had healed on the timeline my orthopedic surgeon had predicted. But I walked with a slight adjustment in my gait that I had been told would resolve with continued physical therapy. Connor sat in the gallery. Marcus sat at the counsel table beside me. Margaret sat at the other counsel table with Gerald Fitch. She was wearing a navy suit and her pearls, and she looked across the courtroom like a woman who had aged 10 years in the past 6 weeks. She had been released on bail following her arrest, which was standard for a defendant with no prior criminal history and ties to the community. And she had been living in a hotel in McLean since she had left our house the morning after the dinner. The McLean house itself was subject to the civil settlement negotiations, which were ongoing. Marcus had filed a civil complaint alongside the criminal charges seeking damages for medical expenses, lost professional capacity during recovery, and the specific harm occasioned by the deliberate poisoning of a pregnant woman. The civil case would proceed on its own timeline, but the trust reallocation was a separate proceeding and had been prioritized. Judge Donnelly was a compact woman in her late 50s with the specific quality of attention I had noticed the one time I had appeared before her. Previously, she read everything, retained everything, and did not waste time on arguments she had already assessed and dismissed. She had clearly read the petition and its 57 pages of attachments thoroughly. She asked one question before any argument was presented. Ms. Walsh, she said, looking at Margaret, is it your position that you do not contest the reallocation petition as filed? Gerald Fitch stood. Your Honor, my client confirms she does not contest the petition. Judge Donnelly looked at Margaret directly. Ms. Walsh, I want to hear from you directly on this point. Do you understand the effect of this concession? You are relinquishing your primary beneficiary status under the Walsh Family Trust and consenting to the transfer of 51% of the principal to the custodial account of the minor child. Do you understand this? Margaret stood. She looked at the judge and then briefly across the courtroom at Connor. I understand, she said. Her voice was steady. And you consent to this without duress or coercion. I consent, Margaret said. Judge Donnelly made a note. She looked at me. Ms. Okafor Walsh, does the petitioner confirm the terms of the proposed reallocation? I stood. The petitioner confirms. We request that the reallocation be effective upon the birth of the minor child currently expected within 3 weeks, and that the custodial account be established in advance of the birth to ensure timely processing. The court will so order, Judge Donnelly said. She made additional notes. She looked at both counsel tables. I want to address something on the record before I conclude this proceeding. The courtroom was quiet. The Walsh Family Trust was established by Senator Richard Walsh with specific provisions designed to protect the interests of future generations, Judge Donnelly said. The adverse conduct provision, the provision at issue in this petition, is not standard language. It was deliberately included by the grantor, and the specificity of its terms suggests that the grantor had anticipated the possibility of conduct precisely of the nature documented in this petition. She looked at the papers before her. The evidence in this matter is extensive and credible. The conduct documented the deliberate administration of a harmful substance to a pregnant woman, and the physical assault that followed is exactly the kind of conduct the provision was designed to address. She looked at Margaret. The court notes for the record that the concession made today does not resolve the criminal proceedings which will proceed independently. The court further notes that the protection of the trust's future beneficiary was the expressed intent of the grantor, and the court is satisfied that this order fulfills that intent. She signed the order. "This matter is concluded," she said. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. I stood at the counsel table for a moment after the gallery began to clear. Marcus was organizing his documents. Connor had come through the bar to where I was standing and had put his hand briefly on my back, the right side healed now, and had said nothing because nothing needed to be said. I looked across the courtroom to where Margaret Walsh was standing with Gerald Fitch. She was listening to something her attorney was saying, but her eyes had drifted to the space between them and me. Not to Connor, not to the judge's now empty bench, to me. I held her gaze for a moment. I did not feel what I might have expected to feel, not victory, not vindication, not even the satisfaction of correctness I had felt when the freeze order came through. What I felt was something quieter than any of those things. The specific contained peace of a person who has completed a significant piece of work and can now put it down. I turned away. I picked up my bag with my good right arm. I walked out of the courtroom. In the corridor, Connor fell into step beside me. We walked out of the courthouse and into the late November afternoon, which was cold and gray and entirely ordinary. "It's done," Connor said. "The trust is done," I said. "The criminal case will take longer, but the trust is done." "Yes," I said. "The trust is done." He reached for my hand. We walked toward the parking structure. Margaret Walsh was arraigned 2 weeks after the trust hearing. She entered a plea of not guilty on all 3 counts, which was the expected move her criminal defense attorney, a man named Howard Garrett, who was considerably more experienced in criminal defense than Gerald Fitch had been, had advised her to contest the charges and prepare for trial. I understood this. A guilty plea at arraignment in the absence of a negotiated arrangement was unusual, and a trial would give her attorney the opportunity to challenge the evidence, to argue the footage was ambiguous, to dispute the chain of custody on the bottle, to challenge the toxicologist's methodology. These were legitimate defense strategies, and I had anticipated each of them. What Margaret's attorney had not fully accounted for was the quality of the prosecution's case. Detective Reeves and her partner had been thorough. The forensic team had been thorough. The toxicologist they had retained, a professor from Georgetown Medical School named Dr. Andrea Washington, was one of the most credentialed experts in her field and had testified in 12 prior prosecutions with a record of successful cross-examination survival. Marcus and I were not the prosecution. The case was in the hands of the DA's office, but I had made myself available as a witness and as a resource, and I had prepared the kind of witness file that left the prosecuting attorney, a young ADA named Terrence Bell, who had been in the DA's office for 7 years, with exactly the documentation he needed in exactly the format he needed it. The trial was scheduled to begin 14 months after the night of the fall. Our daughter was born 6 weeks before the trial date. Her name is Adeze. It is a name from Connor's great-grandmother's family, an Irish family named Walsh, who had at some point in the 19th century become entangled with a Nigerian shipping family named Okafor, and the specific complicated history of that entanglement is a story for another time. But Adeze was a name that existed in the records on both sides, And when Connor found it one evening while going through an old box of his father's genealogy research, we both felt immediately that it was hers. She was born on a Tuesday morning in December, 6 weeks after the trust hearing in a hospital room where the only people present were Connor, our OB, and the nursing team. There was no one waiting in the hallway who needed to be managed. There was no performance required of anyone. There was only the work of bringing a person into the world and the sound that a room makes when that work is successfully completed. I held her for the first time and thought you were here the whole time, through the nausea and the cracked ribs and the fractured shoulder and the courtroom and the legal briefs and all of it. You were already here, and you were already fighting, and you did not know you were fighting, and you fought anyway. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had Connor's jaw and my eyes and a specific expression of concentrated seriousness that the nurses described as unusual for a newborn and that I recognized immediately as characteristic. She was perfect. Connor cried. He held her, and he cried with the specific lack of self-consciousness of someone in the presence of something larger than the management of appearance. And I watched him, and I felt something shift. In the architecture of the previous year, all of it, the tea and the fall, and the courtroom and the 48 hours and the dinner, and the hearing shift into its correct position relative to this moment. This was what it had been for. Not the trust, not the case. This person, 7 pounds and 2 ounces who had been here the whole time. The trial lasted 11 days. Terrence Bell was a better trial attorney than I had expected from someone 7 years out of law school, and I told him so after the verdict. He had the specific quality of a good litigator, the ability to build a narrative from evidence that is inherently fragmentary to ask questions that produced exactly the information the jury needed without producing anything the defense could use to read the room. He had read Adaize's medical records into evidence with a restraint that was more effective than drama would have been. And when Dr. Washington testified about the cumulative exposure and its probable effect on a developing fetus, the jury's attention had the quality of people confronting something they had understood intellectually, but were now feeling. The footage was the center of the prosecution's case. They showed it twice, once during opening statements as a preview of what the evidence would establish, and once during the prosecution's case-in-chief with Dr. Washington on the stand, explaining frame by frame what the footage documented. Margaret's attorney, Howard Garrett, was competent. He challenged the chain of custody on the bottle. He challenged the toxicologist's methodology. He argued that the footage of the hands on the staircase was consistent with an attempt to catch a falling person rather than to push one. He presented a character witness, an old friend of Margaret's from the senator's political circle, who testified about her long history of charitable work and community engagement. The jury was out for 4 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts on all 3 counts. The attempted murder charges, both counts carried the weight of the premeditation that the prosecution had established through the kitchen footage and the forensic timeline. The assault charge was in some ways the simplest footage injury causation. But the attempted murder charges were the ones that mattered because they established in the public record permanently and irrevocably what Margaret Walsh had done and what she had intended. I was in the courtroom when the verdicts were read. I was in the front row of the gallery with Connor beside me and Marcus on my other side, and Adaize in a carrier on my chest. Because I had decided, after considerable thought, that I wanted her present. Not for the verdict itself. She was 11 weeks old and had no awareness of courtrooms or verdicts. But because I had promised myself in the hospital after the fall that the record would be clean and complete, and that she would be able to read it someday and understand what had happened. Being present at the verdict was part of that record. When the jury foreman read the first guilty verdict, I felt Connor's hand tighten on mine. I looked at the jury. I looked at Terrence Bell, who allowed himself one small, controlled exhale. I looked at Howard Garrett, who maintained his professional composure with the practiced ease of a man who has lost before and knows how to do it. I looked at Margaret. She was facing forward looking at the jury. Her expression was controlled in the way her expressions were always controlled, the composure that had been her most consistent quality throughout this entire proceeding. The composure that had not broken on the night of the dinner when I showed her the footage, the composure that had not broken during her arrest, or her arraignment, or the 11 days of testimony. It broke now. Not dramatically, not in the way of movie courtroom scenes. Her composure broke in the small way of a person who has finally run out of the resource that has sustained them. Her eyes filled. Her jaw worked briefly. She pressed her lips together, and then she looked at Connor. Connor did not look away. He held her gaze with an expression I could not fully read. Not anger, not grief. Something more fundamental than either. The expression of someone who is seeing clearly a thing they have spent a long time not seeing clearly, and is acknowledging that they see it now. He did not squeeze her hand. He did not nod. He simply looked at her and let her look at him, and then he looked away back to the front of the courtroom, and the moment was over. The jury foreman read the remaining verdicts. Guilty. Guilty. The judge thanked the jury. She scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks hence. The bailiff led Margaret out of the courtroom. I did not watch her go. Sentencing was a Thursday in February. Adayez was 4 months old. She was at home with a sitter because I had decided that the sentencing hearing was not the right occasion for her presence. The verdict had been for the record. The sentencing was for the system. I submitted a victim impact statement. It was 11 pages, single-spaced, and it was as meticulously documented as any brief I have ever written. It described in chronological order the 6 weeks of poisoning and its physical effects, the fall, and its physical effects, the impact on my professional capacity during recovery, the impact on Connor, the prenatal care implications, and the ongoing psychological adjustment of living in a house that had been the site of a crime. It also described Adayez. I described her birth. I described what it felt like to hold her in the delivery room, knowing what had been attempted before she arrived. I described the specific, complicated gratitude of a person who has come very close to losing something and has not lost it. I described the quality of her attention when she looks at a new thing, the concentrated seriousness that the nurses had noted, and that I had recognized immediately. I described what I wanted for her, not the trust, not the money, not the real estate portfolio, but the specific, ordinary things that parents want for children. The education, the safety, the knowledge that the structures around her were built to last. I submitted it without revision. Every word was accurate. I did not soften anything, and I did not dramatize anything, because the facts, accurately stated, required neither softening nor dramatization. The judge read it into the record in full. She sentenced Margaret Walsh to 12 years in federal prison on the attempted murder charges, with the assault charge running concurrently. She noted in her sentencing remarks the premeditated nature of the poisoning, the duration of the conduct, and the specific vulnerability of the victim, a pregnant woman in her own home. She noted the sworn admission that had been provided and credited it as a mitigating factor consistent with what I had told Gerald Fitch I would recommend. 12 years rather than the maximum of 15. Margaret stood and received the sentence with her eyes forward and her composure intact. I watched her go. The custodial account for Adayez Walsh was established the week she was born, as ordered by Judge Donnelly. The trust reallocation was processed in January, after the criminal conviction provided additional basis for the estate court to confirm the permanent revocation of Margaret's primary beneficiary status. The account, as of Adayez's first birthday, held approximately $9.5 million. The 51% of principal, plus the first year of reinvested income. It will continue to grow under professional management until Adayez reaches the age designated in the trust documents, at which point it transfers to her direct control. She does not know about this yet. She is 1 year old. She knows that her world contains her father and me and Marcus, and a sitter named Delphine, who sings to her in French, and a rattle she has strong opinions about. She knows that certain people produce certain responses in her. Her father produces a specific excited kick and reach that I have never seen her produce for anyone else, and she knows the specific warmth of being held by someone who loves her. She does not know that this money exists. She will not know for years. And when she does know, I intend to tell her its history not to burden her with it, but because I believe that knowing the history of a thing helps you understand its weight, and understanding the weight of a thing helps you carry it correctly. The McLean house was sold as part of the civil settlement. The sale price was slightly below market, the estate had been maintained, but not updated, and the settlement timeline did not allow for the kind of preparation that maximizes sale value. But the proceeds were sufficient to cover the civil damages Marcus had negotiated. Medical expenses, lost income during recovery, the specific, harder-to-quantify damages for which civil law provides compensation, not because money is adequate for what was done, but because it is the instrument available. The Alexandria office building and the Bethesda development are now managed by a professional property management firm retained by the trust's remaining trustee, a bank that had been designated in the original trust documents as the successor trustee in the event of Margaret's removal. The income from these properties flows into the trust, which flows eventually to Ades. Connor had not contested any of these proceedings. He had appeared at the hearings when his appearance was required and had signed the documents that required his signature and had not at any point acted to protect his mother's interests over his daughter's. This had cost him something. I was aware of this cost, and I did not minimize it. He had grown up with that woman. He had organized significant portions of his life around managing her and accommodating her and finding ways to love her that were consistent with who she actually was. That organizing principle was gone now, and the absence of it left a space that was being filled slowly with other things. With his daughter, primarily. He was, as I had told him, he would be in the room. He had been in the room for every feeding and every bath and every 3 a.m. waking that had required someone to be upright and functional and present. He had been in the room in the specific way of a person who has understood clearly and permanently what presence means and why it matters. The grief for the version of his mother that had never existed was not gone. It was as I had told him lighter. It had been joined by other things, and the other things were larger. I want to tell you something about evidence because I am an attorney, and evidence is my professional language. And it is also, I have discovered, the language in which this particular story is most accurately told. Evidence is not the same as truth. Evidence is the portion of truth that can be documented, preserved, and presented in a form that withstands scrutiny. The gap between evidence and truth is one of the fundamental problems of the legal system, the things that cannot be documented, the things that leave no record, the things that happen in rooms without cameras and in conversations without witnesses. These are also true. The law cannot always reach them. What I had in this case was evidence that was sufficient to establish what had happened, sufficient to support criminal charges and a conviction, sufficient to trigger the trust provision and protect my daughter's inheritance. Not all cases have sufficient evidence. Many people who have been harmed in exactly the ways I was harmed have no footage, no forensic trail, no documented record. They have their experience and no mechanism to make the experience legible to the institutions that adjudicate these things. I was fortunate in ways that many people are not. I was fortunate to have the professional training to recognize the threat when it was still in its early stages, before it had produced its intended outcome. I was fortunate to have the resources to install cameras, retain a forensic specialist, and fund a litigation strategy. I was fortunate to have Marcus, who had been waiting for a call he had agreed to receive and who had moved at the speed required when the call came. I was fortunate that Adaeze survived. I want to be clear about this because the story has a shape that could make it seem like the survival was inevitable, like the evidence was always going to produce the right result, like the case was always going to be made. It was not inevitable. If I had drunk the tea for 2 more weeks, if I had not noticed the repositioned container, if I had not installed the camera, any of those things, and the outcome is different. And many of the people who are in situations like mine notice nothing, nor notice but have no mechanism to document, but have no one to help them present it. I am not telling this story to demonstrate what a prepared person can accomplish. I am telling it because I have sat across from enough clients in enough difficult situations to know that the prepared person and the unprepared person who are both in danger deserve the same protection. And one of them gets it, and the other often does not. And the difference is not moral character or intelligence or the seriousness of what was done to them. It is resources and information and access. This is something I think about now in the practice I have built with Marcus and the team we have assembled. We take cases that other firms consider too complicated, too resource-intensive, or too unlikely to generate the fees that justify the work. We take them because the people who need the most thorough legal representation are often the people least positioned to pay for it. And because the legal systems promise that evidence properly assembled produces appropriate outcomes only holds if the assembly is actually possible for the people who need it. Adayes will learn this eventually. Not the abstractions of it, but the specific texture of it. The way you learn the texture of something by living near it for a long time. She will grow up near this work, and she will understand in the way children understand things they grow up near what it is for. It is October again. A year since the Sunday evening in late September when my mother-in-law pushed me down a flight of stairs. The anniversary has come and gone with less ceremony than I expected, not because the events of that year were not significant, but because significance and ceremony are not the same thing. And I have never been someone who requires ceremony to understand the weight of what has passed. Adayeze is 10 months old. She is pulling herself to standing on the furniture, which she accomplishes with the concentrated effort of a person who has decided that this is the thing to do and is doing it. She stands at the coffee table and looks at the room from the unfamiliar height with an expression of assessment that I recognize as her father's expression when he is figuring something out. She is healthy. She is within every normal developmental range and several that are above it. Her pediatrician describes her at every visit with words like alert and engaged, which are the words you use for a child who is paying attention to everything and deciding what to make of it. Connor and I have resumed the ordinary architecture of our life, which is the best description I have for what we are doing. We make breakfast. We manage Adayeze's schedule. We go to work him to the design firm he has been building for 6 years, me to the practice that Marcus and I have continued to expand. We argue occasionally about small things. We are good together in the specific way of people who have been through something and have come out on the same side of it. I pass the staircase every day. I have thought about whether this is something I should have a response to a flinch and avoidance the specific somatic memory that physical trauma can leave behind. For the first few months, there was something like that. A heightened attention, a moment of notice each time I approach the top of the stairs. It is less now. Almost gone. The staircase is a staircase. I had the security camera professionally upgraded in January. It is now a system with 4 cameras covering the main living areas, with off-site backup and enhanced audio capture. This is not paranoia. It is documentation infrastructure. The same infrastructure I would recommend to any client in any situation where the record matters. The record always matters. The record is everything. Marcus and I are currently working on a case involving a widow whose in-laws have been systematically removing assets from her late husband's estate through a series of transactions that each appear in isolation to be legitimate. The transactions do not appear legitimate when you lay them end to end on a timeline and compare them to the estate documents. I have spent 3 weeks laying them end to end. The picture is very clear. I sat at my desk last Tuesday morning reviewing the timeline, and I thought about the memo I wrote 3 weeks before the fall, the contemporaneous record of what I had noticed and what it meant and what I was going to do about it. I thought about the quality of attention required to produce that memo, the willingness to look at something directly rather than the direction you would prefer to look, the willingness to name what you see rather than what you hope to see, the discipline to document before you have the full picture, because the full picture assembles from parts and the parts need to be preserved. This is what I do. It is what I have always done. I look at the evidence. I name what I see. I build the record. I picked up my pen and kept writing. There are people who will come into your life wearing the face of the thing you need and carrying something else entirely. They will come in through the door you have opened because you opened it in good faith, and they will move through your space with the specific confidence of someone who has decided that what is yours is theirs to take. The only defense against this is not suspicion. Suspicion poisons the openness that makes a life worth living. The defense is documentation, the willingness to write down what you see in the moment you see it with the clarity that the moment requires. The willingness to trust your own perception of a thing, even when the thing you are perceiving is something you would prefer not to be true. You do not have to be a lawyer to do this. You have to be paying attention. You have to be willing to say, I see what I see. This is what happened. This is what it means. Evidence is not a professional skill. It is a human one. The record you keep of your own life is the most important case you will ever build. Keep it carefully.